Welcome to Wisconsin in Focus. I'm Benjamin Yount, filling in again for J.D. Davidson, who's taking a much-needed day off. The University of Wisconsin has had an interesting relationship with Wisconsin lawmakers for the better part of the past decade and a half. Some of that comes from the ideological difference of a Republican-controlled legislature and a liberal university in one of Wisconsin's most Democratic-heavy cities. The other problem is that there's a difference of view when it comes to just how to pay for education and how much to pay for education. Wisconsin famously instituted a tuition freeze that froze tuition at a level that lawmakers found acceptable. After former Republican Governor Tommy Thompson took over at the university and became interim president, he was able to negotiate an end to the tuition freeze with a promise from university leaders that they would not be raising tuition willy-nilly and or every year. In the time that Thompson's been gone, the university leadership has raised tuition each year. Now, the university president, Jay Rothman, is telling lawmakers that he needs anywhere between $855 million and $914 million in order to avoid another tuition increase. This, as you would expect, is not a popular theme among Republican lawmakers who have been questioning just what the university is doing with the $1.3 billion that it currently gets from the state, and how giving more money to the university at a time when it's closing branch campuses and losing students at many campuses, there are questions about whether or not that's a good investment. I had the opportunity this week to talk to State Rep Amanda Nedwuski. She leads the Legislative Study Committee on the future of the UW system, and she's been a vocal and frequent critic of the university's requests for more. University regents are voting at the end of this week, in fact, as we record this here on a Thursday, to whether or not to officially ask for all that money. Nedwuski said the problem comes down to what it is that taxpayers have to pay for, what it is that students have to pay for, and what kind of cuts the university should make on their own, because, as she said, taxpayers don't want to be on the hook forever and ever and ever, and all of the programs and all of the raises and all of the services that the University of Wisconsin is offering to only some Wisconsin students.
They're sort of saying we have less students than we had before, and instead of figuring out why we have less students, why students aren't buying what we're selling, why they're choosing technical college or other paths right out of high school, they're saying we want the taxpayer to backfill our tuition, our loss in tuition revenue, so that we can continue to operate at the status quo without making any changes. And the legislature is pushing back and saying, we want to see you make some changes before we reinvest in innovation. So you have to figure, we're talking about an R1 research institution, two of them in our system. We can't figure out why students aren't coming anymore.
Yeah.
I think that the demographic issues need to be addressed by the institution, and they need to figure out, what they're trying to do is they're trying to use things like the Wisconsin Tuition Promise to attract more students from first-generation families, which I think is great. But at the same time, we already have a lot of federal and state funding programs for students from low-income homes. And the Wisconsin Tuition Promise, amongst my constituents at least, is about as popular as student loan forgiveness. The taxpayer doesn't want to bear the burden for the cost of everyone's education after K-12.
The Wisconsin Tuition Promise, by the way, if you're not familiar, it is wraparound funding that once all of the private student funding that you can get grants, scholarships, the like, once all of the federal funding is exhausted, the university says it will pay the rest of the cost of tuition for kids from families who make less than $55,000 a year, but it only pays for tuition. It doesn't pay for room and board and books and the like. There are questions about the university trying to fill its ranks with kids who maybe aren't ready for college, maybe aren't going to be successful at college. Nedwuski pointed out that there are an awful lot of kids in Wisconsin who are opting not to go to college because they figured out that spending $120,000 to $150,000 to $200,000 to get a college degree is not their path forward. And as more kids choose to not go to college, the deficit at the University of Wisconsin continues to grow. Just one last thing, and I know that numbers are never a lot of fun, but tuition is the largest single line item in the University of Wisconsin's budget coming in. In other words, the school makes more money from tuition than it does from state support. And so when you talk about more state support, the question is, well, why don't you charge the people who are coming to the school to use the school that they are paying for? But like I said, this is not a new disagreement. A lot of this goes back years, and Nedwuski said that it is not that Republican lawmakers refuse to fund the University of Wisconsin. They're not looking to starve the school on the vine. The University of Wisconsin-Madison is an elite public institution. But she said there is so little trust between lawmakers and university types who don't trust the Republican legislature, that unless and until that problem is solved, questions of funding are just going to continue to get lobbed back and forth and have no real resolution.
I mean, you're talking about a 5% and 3% general wage increases for staff and faculty. But when I asked how many faculty are you losing because of wage competition, they had no answer. They want to talk about preserving accessibility while covering inflationary cost increase, but they will not talk about program consolidation or expanding their remote learning options. And they want to talk about increases in innovation, including the creation of an artificial intelligence hub. Well, I think taxpayers would likely support investments in AI for a system, but it's hard to be confident in institutions that are seeming so reluctant to share simple information with the legislature. I mean, the lack of transparency and accountability shown by the system in the last 2 decades has resulted in so much distrust between the legislature and the system and the taxpayer.
Unless and until that trust is repaired, unless and until there is trust again, unless and until somebody is willing to reach out their hand and try and find a compromise, the situation at the University of Wisconsin is going to continue unchanged. You can find more about this story and the stories that I'm certain we are going to write about this going forward over at the Center Square. Once again, thanks for listening to Wisconsin in Focus, and please don't forget to subscribe.